Good morning. It's May 16th, 2022. Happy Monday and welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. And yes, for a lot of people, I'm sure they're bleary-eyed and tired today, waiting last night to see if that goalie with Dallas is indestructible or not, but it finally happened. Calgary got through, and we are looking forward to the Battle of Alberta for the first time in 30 years. That's going to be quite something. To Toronto fans out there, well, Toronto's Toronto, maybe another 50 years you'll get in there yet. For the time being, we got Calgary and Edmonton are going to clash. It's going to be a lot of fun coming up. We're going to have some guests going on in that. We're not a sports show, but hey, this is huge. Getting a playoff run with those two teams going at each other is going to be a lot of fun to watch for even casual viewers. And yeah, last night was a late one for a lot of people, but it went. It's also International Pickle Day. Just so you know, this is important to remember. You wouldn't want to forget this one. There's nothing more embarrassing than getting through May and realizing you've missed your observance for International Pickle Day. So make sure to send your loved ones their Pickle Day card or whatever goes with that sort of holiday in particular today. So good to see you guys all checking in from all over the place. Tabor and Fernie and roundabouts. I see some Flames fans already coming in. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of dispute going on, between those two teams as things move along. But it will be a fun series, and we'll have some fun with it here, too. I got a couple of good guests on today. Columnist Lee Harding. I got him back. I know we had a hiccup last time. He is coming on this time for sure. He assures me. We're going to talk about that new Sask United party in Saskatchewan. So, yeah, they got a new provincial party. They've got a independent MLA, I believe, who is sitting on with that, and Jerry Ritz. So they got some names. We're going to see what's going on with that. And then Spencer Fernando is going to come on, and people might recognize that name. He's quite a prolific columnist and writer, and he's been involved with the National Citizens Coalition as well. We're going to talk about a couple of his columns on authoritarianism, on the media, and the slant of it these days. It's always a good chat with Mr. Fernando. So before we get on to everything else, I'm going to start off with my rant, and I'm going to kick it off with one of my favorite subjects, and that being myself. Or at least I'm going to use a personal example of an effective protest, because we've seen a lot of things going on, the Jagmeet Singh thing, a lot of confusion, about whether we support protests, not protests, what's an appropriate to protest, how do you do it right, how do you do it wrong? Well, I feel that we're doing it the wrong way quite often. I'll offer some my life experience of protests and perhaps how to help things be effective as well. I want to clear the air on some misinformation going on about in the land of social media. That being the one, somebody was tweeting about that the other day, that I drove into a bunch of protesters with a pickup truck. Now, in light of the horrific murder of protesters by a lunatic driving into protesters in Charlottesville years ago, I'd better clarify what I did in 2011 anyways. And rest assured, it was nothing dangerous or threatening. So some people might remember the series of protests across North America called Occupy back in 2011. There were copycat protests of Occupy Wall Street, where leftist protesters took over a park in New York City and set up camp in a general protest against capitalism. Support protests and marches were held across North America and held in cities, and that's fine. The problem came when groups of people set up encampments in city parks all over North America. Now, cities tolerated the encampments for a couple of weeks, but as they dragged on, it was evident there was no realistic end game for these protests, and something had to be done. Their demands were disparate and impossible to fulfill. And that's one of the problems I'm going to get to with ineffective protesting. So some of their demands are things like, we want a Canada where the debt per capita does not double in the next decade. Okay, sounds nice, but how do you negotiate that? We want a Canada where our system of exchange no longer embodies the logic of a cancer cell. These were literal demands made by people squatting in Calgary's park and protesting. And this list of demands would change daily, too, as they changed leaders almost daily in these squatter camps. So as the weeks of squatting in parks dragged into months, cities across North America were forced to get injunctions and have police remove these protesters. The camps had become filthy, overdoses were becoming common, and sexual assaults were even happening. It sounded much like the Chaz zone in Seattle during the BLM protests. The mess just couldn't continue. Now, while most of the cities in North America had gotten rid of their Occupy squatters, getting into November and such, Calgary's mayor was reticent. He didn't want to have those protesters removed, despite damage being caused to Olympic Plaza and legitimate events being canceled and the safety issues that were going on. You see, these lefties were part of his support base, and he was relatively recently elected at that time. He was hoping the cold weather would take care of them before he had to act. Well, he was wrong. They weren't going anywhere. So I started a petition demanding City Hall act. And in the petition, it noted in the preamble that taxpayers would be fined if they don't shovel their sidewalk within 24 hours of a snowfall, but you can apparently squat in perpetuity in a city park. The petition gained some steam, and soon it had thousands of signatures. It was going to be presented to City Council by my then City Councilor to the rest of them in City Hall the next Monday morning. On that Friday, though, Mayor Nenshi told the press that my petition was a waste of time. He said that the charter prevented the squatters from any enforcement, and it was impossible to physically remove somebody based on a bylaw violation anyway. So he said I was basically pissing in the wind, and the case was closed, and we just have to let these guys tire out and leave on their own. So, I decided, well, let's put this to the test. So I went and checked out the park, and I noticed a service road that entered the park. It was designed for maintenance, and it was easy to access and wide open. So on the Sunday morning, I took my pickup truck, drove down the service road into the park, and put my truck in the park. Poured a coffee. I was nowhere near any of the tents as they'd set up out in the grass, and I remained on the pavement, or the service area. So again, that rumor that I was driving into or putting protesters at risk, nothing of the sort. And few of those squatters were even out of bed yet. Now, I'd prepared some signs with ludicrous demands and screwed them to the box liner of my truck. I demanded an end to marmot tickling and the return of the TV series Arrested Development. That one actually came true, and unfortunately the return was sucked. But either way, it was a ridiculous demand at the time. And I demanded that 2-ply toilet paper be put in all public washrooms. My demands were stupid, but they were no more dumb than those of the squatters. Now, the squatters claimed their tents were a form of expression, thus they were protected by the charter. Well, I claimed my truck was my form of expression. So, of course, before long, bylaw officers approached and asked me to move. I politely refused and explained I was exercising my charter rights, and I wouldn't move till my demands were met. Needless to say, they were flummoxed. So soon, more senior officers approached and told me I was breaking a bylaw by parking in the park. They asked if I could park on the street. I said, sure, as soon as you make all those squatters in the tents move to a campground, and then roll out my window. Eventually, the bylaw officers turned into police officers. My truck was surrounded by annoyed squatters, along with frustrated police and bylaw officers, and the press was building up as well. So this standoff lasted for a few hours. Mayor Nenshi and City Hall were stuck with two choices. They could have me removed and prove themselves as hypocrites, or leave me there and let the gong show become worse in this park. So eventually, Nenshi made his choice. The police came by, and I was informed that a tow truck was coming. I would have to leave my truck when it got there, and I was going to be fined. I asked what would happen if I refused to leave my truck. They told me I'd be physically removed and charged with criminal obstruction. I told them that won't be needed. I'm going to leave willingly when the tow truck got there. I'd made my point. No need to make them wrestle me out. I'm not going to be like one of those crazy lefty protesters and make them drag me out of there. So the tow truck had arrived. I left my truck and was issued with $400 in fines. I got those knocked down to $100 later on, by the way. So the headlines the day after were fantastic. The Calgary Sun cover said in big bold print, "Stupefy Calgary." Oh, it was beautiful. And inside there was a big 2-page spread with a big headline that said "Hypocrites." And the mayor and City Hall had no excuses left. So that Monday, they sought an injunction and the squatters were removed within a week. Now, what Nenshi said was impossible on Friday was accomplished the following Monday, only because of the protest. I'm going to pat my own back a bit there. Take some credit. Protests can make a difference, but you see, they got to be targeted and they have to have a goal. That's the difference between what I did and some other protests. I mean, I was prepared to spend no more than 24 hours out there. I wasn't going to entrench myself for a long time. When protests go awry, it's when they settle in and there isn't a reasonably negotiated end to them. You've got to have terms that can be met. And that was the case with the squatters and arguably later on with the Ottawa protests later. I mean, the Ottawa protests demanded the end of vaccine mandates, but they're also confused through some side demands by a minority. But all the same, they're demanding the Prime Minister step down and some other unreasonable demands. Now, as soon as the demands get unreasonable, the protest becomes untenable. I still completely oppose the imposition of the Emergencies Act and the treatment of the truckers' convoy protesters. I mean, the Occupy squatters stayed for months, while the Ottawa protesters were removed in a couple of weeks. So you can't compare those two protests. Still, there's things to be learned. If one wants to hold an effective demonstration, there has to be a way out at the end. There has to be reasonably negotiable terms, and there has to be somebody who can speak on behalf of the protest. I mean, saying it's decentralized is a good idea, but in the end, it makes it very difficult because you get different messaging and you get things from all over. And it's all easier said than done, but protests can backfire and actually reduce public support for a cause if they're done wrong. In fact, they often do. Some come out and say, "I don't care what the public thinks." Well, you'd better. Because it's fine if you don't care, but the politicians do, and they're the ones who will send the police if they feel the public supports that approach. And the right to protest, I mean, it's essential in democracy, integral. We can't allow it to be eroded. And that's what we're getting worried about with the whole Jagmeet Singh thing last week, where they're trying to talk about cracking down on expression. Hey, the approach to Singh was tasteless and nasty. That just comes with the turf. It sucks, but I don't think it was a good idea to go out and do it. It doesn't help public support, but they have every right to do it. Protesting, though, has to be done with care and planning. Impulse demonstrations that last a day or so are fine. When things entrench, you'd better have a plan. So we might have more restrictions come from the government in the future. They love control, and they've proven they like to exercise it. And in that case, the citizens are going to need to protest again. We're not done. So let's learn from past protests. We can be successful with them, but you have to do them right. All right, that's where I'm at. Now, let's get in and talk to our news editor, Mr. Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Cory, I'm jubilant that the Flames won, but it still has not lifted my anger from the weekend. And let me tell you why. As you know, Calgary's in a bit of a problem at the moment. We've got single mothers being shot as they drive down the streets of Forest Lawn. We've got a downtown zone that's looking more and more like an episode of The Walking Dead every single day. But our city leaders, God bless them, have the foresight to name an official bird. Yes, as of the weekend, it's official. The chickadee, there it is. That filthy flying thing that I'm in a battle of wills with is our city bird. As you'll remember, Cory, this is the same bird that has been chirping out my window at 4:45 a.m. for more than 2 weeks now. And it was back this morning, chirping, no doubt, in victory that he is now the official bird and probably protected from me grabbing a shotgun and blasting him to smithereens. So, all right, bird, you enjoy your day. My day is coming.
Well, I mean, you've lost the battle. I thought, shouldn't you have been out there lobbying for the Magpie to try and, because that was the second place finisher, wasn't it?
The Magpie was the second place finisher. And, that they're no different than seagulls. They're just, flying human. They're just flying garbage receptacles, in my opinion. Look at it. What's wrong with the mighty hawk or the peregrine falcon? That's not even a bird, Cory, for goodness sake. Ridiculous.
Well,
anyways,
your plugs hit.
My rant is done. Let's get on with the news this morning. Battle of Alberta. We've got a battle of columnists already this morning. We've got some lunatic by the name of Lee Harding who is predicting that the Oilers will win, believe it or not. I don't know what he's on this morning. The more sane Arthur Green is correctly predicting a Flames victory, and I'll agree with him. I think it's going to be over in 5. I think if the Flames play as well as they did against Dallas, I think they'll steamroll poor old Mike Smith. Linda, our Mel Risden's got a column up on Jason Stefan, a Red Deer MLA. He's questioning why does Alberta always have to subsidize Quebec's energy prices? So that's up there, and there's a video to go along with that. The aforementioned Mr. Harding, when he's not pontificating on the Oilers, wrote a story about Leslyn Lewis today and what she thinks of Patrick Brown's attempt to attract social conservatives. And my favorite story of the morning, Russian oligarch number 7 has croaked from toad poisoning. You can't make this stuff up, Cory, and our Amanda Brown has got a great story up there about how he was injected with toad venom over the weekend. And he's the 7th Russian billionaire to suffer a horrible fate since they invaded Ukraine. Other stuff was a more weekend of rain and flooding in Saskatchewan and parts of Manitoba. And our Chris Oldcorn has got a story on that. And some good stuff, Cory, I'd like to point out from the weekend. You'll remember former fan favorite of the Flames, Mark Giordano, went to Seattle, and now he's with Toronto. His house is up for sale in Calgary. So if you've got $2.5 million, you can move into Gio's old home in Altadore. 700 bottle wine room. So I guess Gio was a fan of the Tibble. Our Dave Makachuk's got a very interesting column on James Bond. One of the big people out of there, Miss Moneypenny, you'll remember, turned out after the war came to Calgary. and she lived in Calgary, and the whole Miss Moneypenny character was based on her. And her son, General John de Chastelain, went through the ranks to become Chief of Defense Staff. So quite a family there. Our Linda Slobodian has got a column on Premier Jason Kenney and what kind of margin he's going to need to carry on as UCP leader. And David Milgaard, 23 years of his life, thrown in jail at 17, served 23 years of a sentence for murder that he did not commit. Sadly passed away in Calgary at the age of 69 on Sunday. So we've got a story on that. And bigger news coming up later on this afternoon. Our own Rachel Emmanuel is the only journalist traveled from Canada with Premier Kenney. He's down in Washington today, meeting with any energy official he can talk to about trying to get more Alberta oil into the States and how they're going to do that. And our Rachel is the only traveling reporter with him. So hopefully we'll be getting some good exclusives out of that, Cory.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So that's all that I've got. And I'm now leaving to figure out my next step in the battle against the chickadee.
Well, I had a commenter give some advice there. Mr. Thomas has said you should borrow Makachuk's cat. And that may help you deal with that nefarious bird.
That's all right. I'll ask Dave. I'll ask Dave after the show if I could borrow the cat.
Right on. Thanks, Dave. We'll see you after the show.
Take care.
Speaking for myself, though, I do like chickadees. They of course, I sleep more deeply. Actually, my hearing's terrible anyways, so I'll take those over magpies in my view, but the chickadee seems to be driving poor Dave over the edge. But we'll see if that gets resolved. And a lot of other serious news stories, going on out there, of course, too, and everything. So that's that reminder. I mean, boy, that's something else. Yeah, Rachel is out there in Washington with Premier Kenney right now. She's got some exclusive time with him. She'll be talking with him, see what kind of things she gets. He's Mr. Kenney's got a busy week. Premier Kenney. The review is coming out on Wednesday. We're going to be doing a special Wednesday night, by the way. Tune in at 3:45 Wednesday afternoon, and we'll start covering for whenever those leadership ballot results come out. We'll have a number of guests, and we'll be talking about the implications of the ballot and whatever happens after that. It's a really bizarre time. And that'll segue in well to talk to my next guest, Lee Harding, who we will put on the spot for his terrible taste in hockey teams tomorrow. But today we'll stick to more news type issues with that party in Saskatchewan and these new parties that spring up all over. But I just like to remind everybody to get out there, and that's how we have these stories. That's how we have Rachel out in Washington. That's how we have Lee out in Saskatchewan, and people all over contributing because you guys have been subscribing. So, hey, get on there. This is how independent media keeps independent, is through subscriptions. You guys have been fantastic. I mean, subscribers are constantly climbing up there. More people are discovering us, getting on board. $10 a month, guys, or $99 a year. Use that coupon code TRIGGERED. You get $10 more off of that. Well worth it. We're not asking for charity. We're providing a service. You pay that amount, and that way we can keep providing these things for you. Everybody wins, and you get good independent media that talks about those stories that the mainstream media, come on, let's face it, they're bought and paid for. They're just not going to touch that stuff. So if you want to get the good stuff, help us out and subscribe. The other thing is to pay attention to our sponsors, guys, and I'm going to talk about that one quickly as well before we get to Mr. Harding, and that is Bitcoin Well. They've been a fantastic sponsor. They're one of our first ones here with the Western Standard. They're a great Alberta company based out here. And, of course, they work all the way across Canada. They're publicly traded. When it comes to digital currencies, one of your biggest worries is how safe is it? Are your dollars being well-minded? I mean, are they in your control? That's the thing. You always control your money when you deal with Bitcoin Well. It's non-custodial. Your money's safe. If you're looking to get into digital currencies, these guys can help safely lead you into how to invest and get involved in that sort of thing. And they offer one-on-one personalized service. They call it white glove service. You can sit face-to-face with somebody just like any other investment counselor and talk with them and see if it's right for you. What plans are right for you? Maybe no plans right for you. It's free consultations. You got nothing to lose. To sit down and check it out and see if it's the thing for you. So bitcoinwell.com, guys, check them out and take control of your money. Okay, let's bring Lee Harding into the room here today. He's coming in from out in Saskatchewan there, where we've got a brand new political party to talk about. Hey, Lee, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Glad we get to talk today.
Yeah, right on. And we'll talk again tomorrow. This is one of those rare 2 in a row things, but I don't want to sidetrack too much before we get to that.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Battle of Alberta coming back, and we've waited 31 years for this.
Yeah, that's a long haul.
How many Flames and Oilers fans have never seen a Battle of Alberta? Staggering.
Pretty much anybody under 40 is going to have a hard time remembering it. So it's going to be a wild few weeks, that's for sure. But getting on to the political front then, I mean, that was the first thing to pull you in on. So there's the Saskatchewan United Party. Maybe you can kind of lay out a bit of the background on what's going on there.
Well, there's been a backlash to some of the COVID responses, and people didn't think the NDP was necessarily. The Buffalo Party was kind of muted during all of this, and the PCs didn't have much to say either. So basically, out of this groundswell, people were like, well, maybe we need a different political party. And it was my understanding that some of the people behind this, they tried to use the avenue of the existing parties. They wanted to see a merger between the Buffalo and the PCs, and thought that was actually a done deal. And then someone somewhere didn't like it, and it all fell through. And power is a hard thing to give up. You've really got to be motivated to do that. So they dismissed the True North as being a viable option to join. There's a True North party in Saskatchewan that's trying to get enough signatures to get into existence. And so their hope is that they can spearhead the alternative and maybe have some of these other parties fold into them, or to capture their supporters to be sort of the go-to alternative in this province.
Yeah, well, and it seems almost like Saskatchewan's taken a page out of Alberta's playbook. I mean, some of the irony of calling it, the Sask United Party, when you're starting down that road of perhaps being less united and having a number of parties. What is their response to the fear, like, with what we did to ourselves in Alberta? When you split the Conservatives up too much, you can end up with an NDP default government later on.
Well, that's a very real possibility. And I know from my time having campaigned in the past for the PPC that they are guaranteed to hear that at the doors. You're going to split the vote, the NDP are going to get back in, and that's all. So I think it is a very real possibility, but they've really felt sincere that there was no choice. I had asked at one of their meetings, why not just try and invade the Sask party and overwhelm their membership and bring some changes? And they thought, looking at their constitution, that wasn't necessarily possible. And I find it ironic. One of the main organizers said, look, we got to win this next election. We don't have 10 years. Well, the problem is that it does take 10 years to get a party into power from scratch. Even the Saskatchewan party, that was a merger of progressive, conservative, and liberal sitting MLAs to form a new entity, it took them 10 years before they could get into power. So I don't like their chances of even becoming official opposition in this next election. And if they made it the one after that, I would be quite surprised.
Yeah, so well, this one does have, I guess, some advantages in that there's an incumbent MLA, Nadine Wilson, involved.
Yep, that's right. And the contingency that they are appealing to likes her, appreciates that she was stepping out on this issue, and seems to understand where they're coming from. I know some Saskatchewan Party MLAs, well, I don't think any of them liked her decision, but I know one of them said, you have far more influence from the inside than you do being on Twitter and being an independent on the outside. But there's between the media management that the Saskatchewan Party has had and trying to insulate themselves from Dr. Ryan Miley, who was the head of the NDP, I think they've taken a side that is a little too silent, a little too cautious on the concerns of people who didn't like the direction that it was going with lockdowns, with vaccination being mandatory and this sort of thing. So the Saskatchewan Unified Grassroots, which is not this political party, but a grassroots movement, they really made room for the premier to be more soft in his stance, to remind people that these are our friends and neighbors. And even though they were stridently encouraging people to get vaccinated and denying some services to them, you couldn't get liquor or certain things unless you were vaccinated, they didn't really want it to be some kind of lasting social division in the province. So I would hope that this political party doesn't become too conflated with that, because I think it's very helpful to have a movement that speaks to government no matter who's in power and is not seen as being partisan. Just like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, there were people in the past who said, why don't you form a political party? And they said, well, if we do that, we're going to cease to be what we have intended to be. We'd rather just be an influence, no matter who's in power, to be standing for the same things. So hopefully that entity, if we want to call it that, can remain no matter what becomes of this party.
Yeah, well, that's one of the challenges, I think, that the PPC endured as well, and other alternative parties, I guess you could say, is that there's a lot of very motivated people. They're very strongly against mandates. They're very upset with governments over vaccine passports or lockdowns or any of those things. And they're a strong basis of support to get, but they seem to have a hard ceiling. So you can get that 10% that'll get out there and they'll donate and they'll work hard and they'll get involved. But moving beyond that is you got to get a little more broad if you actually want to win seats. So they're going to have to find that balance.
Oh, absolutely. And I think they wouldn't have any chance in any of the urban ridings, and even the rural ones. I mean, if they can get second, that's great. Ken Rutherford's involved, and Ken Rutherford actually got third in the riding Battleford's Lloydminster, where Jerry Ritz used to be the MP and was the agriculture minister under Harper. And actually, Jerry Ritz, I don't think he's getting, he's no intentions to run as a candidate or anything, but he's lent at least his voice to what's going on here, because he senses there is a legitimate dissatisfaction with the way things have been handled. The curious thing will be what happens if COVID really becomes a nothing. Is there enough here to really organize around? And another question I have is what policy space they're going to have, because once you get beyond that issue, you will get to some of the regular left-right divides, and you may not even find amongst this constituency that you're united. So I don't want to dismiss what they're doing and really pour cold water on it or anything, but I think it is a very difficult uphill battle to bring a party like this into the mainstream.
It's a lot of work, but I mean, it can happen. Again, looking at our history in Alberta, we started with the Alberta Alliance. It had one seat. It took a couple of election cycles. As you said, it's like a 10-year process to really get it viable. Went through a leadership change, got Danielle Smith in, became opposition, and then a whole bizarre, history of falling apart and merging into the UCP, kind of full circle there. But it can be done, and it does have a serious impact on the politics. So this could be the seeds of something that grows into something much larger, too, if they put it together the right way.
Well, that is true. And I think that there was enough of a neglect of one side of the argument here by the Saskatchewan party that there was a political price to be paid, and they are going to pay it. And we're just going to have to see how big of a price that is. The funny thing with people is they're very dedicated to the party that they have. It is almost like a hockey team or a religion. For them to switch allegiances is very difficult. And that's why we see probably our current federal government in there, is because you have certain people that will never switch. The best you can get them to do is to not vote if they're dissatisfied. They will never, can't bring themselves to vote for Team B, whoever that is. And there's some of that that's going to go on here as well. So I really don't know how they're going to do. I think they could lay out a whole policy platform and say, yeah, I think that looks good, but you guys are new, you're not ready to govern, and they're certainly not going to form the next government.
So where are they organizationally right now, though? They're not quite registered as a party yet. That's right?
No, my understanding is they've begun the process, and so the clock is ticking for them to get the 2,500 signatures, and they need to have 100 signatures in 10 different ridings. So that needs to take place. And they have laid the groundwork for that in the meetings where they were kind of talking about what they were hoping to do, intending to do. They did get a group of people that they thought when it comes time, we can call upon them, they will sign and we'll get it under the deadline. So I don't doubt that they will become Saskatchewan's 7th registered party, but how far it will go is an open question. Buffalo's just got a new leader, and they've sort of spent 2 years in internal turmoil. We've had as well the PCs that have they basically cleaned house after Ken Gray resigned as leader. And as one person said to me, they've got 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future. So they have a fund of multiple millions that's from their days as a mainstream party, but that the old guard that holds the purse strings to that doesn't necessarily want to lend those resources to some of the newer things that would be more responsive in the 21st century. So I really don't know how this is going to shake out, but well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, they'll have to stake out some ground where they feel, I guess, the Saskatchewan voters feel the Sask party hasn't been, fully representing them or doing well. One area that the Wilders Independence Party, led by Paul Hinman in Alberta, is doing, for example, is at least pushing towards that, the independence aspect or autonomy or Ottawa versus Alberta issues. But I think Saskatchewan's premier has actually been pretty, Scott Moe's been pretty strong against Ottawa somewhat when it comes to those clashes. So is there quite the discontent, do you think, or an appetite for that kind of a more autonomy-leaning sort of party where Buffalo failed?
Well, there's no lack of displeasure with Trudeau, that's for sure. I mean, if you listen to the Buffalo Party leader, he'll say that Moe was actually weak, that he talked a big talk, but then would just fold when it came to Trudeau. So it really depends on who you ask. There's some people that are happy to stake their flag on a party that is explicitly for more independence. And I think the Buffalo Party will always have that corner, that constituency. That doesn't seem to be much of the groundswell here, although as much as in some way getting out from under the thumb of the federal government would allow more freedom in certain aspects of COVID, I think they would welcome that. I don't really see an anti-Ottawa sentiment as being a big part of it. There might be an anti-World Economic Forum and that kind of control mechanism going on that you might have some opposition to and maybe exercising through Ottawa, but it doesn't really seem to be coming from a Western independence kind of mindset. So I think Buffalo is going to have that cornered. And so this is the problem I see with the party. It says, according to some surveys that were done, that the pandemic, most people had the same political opinion as they did before, except for about a quarter of people. And of that quarter of people, 70% said they moved more to the right and 30% said they moved more to the left. So there is some political ground to be gained, but it is marginal. And so it really depends on what kind of candidates that they can attract and how hard they're willing to work and if they're really willing to work over the long haul. But I think for it to become any kind of viable alternative, you'd probably need to fold the other marginal options into one kind of political entity. I'm not sure there's the will to do that.
Okay, but I mean, one toehold that they do have that's kind of strong in there is having an incumbent MLA, though, sitting in the legislature, even if it's an independent role right now. Do you think, like, again, I just keep drawing the parallels to the Alberta one. It sort of changed. We had one person in the legislature here, and then he managed to coax 3 others to cross the floor and join him, which gave official party status, really shook things up, and it gave a lot more juice to the party. Do you think there's perhaps some discontented legislators out there who might be considering a move if the right structure was there for them to move towards?
Yeah, maybe it has to do with the Alberta ethic being different from the Saskatchewan one. I think it's a little bit more conciliatory here. And I don't know if they view Nadine Wilson as being someone who's going to rally them all onto another side. Kenny came in as an outsider, and it's been a difficult time for him, partly because of the unions and other people making it difficult for him. But I don't really see that there's that same kind of groundswell against Moe. He's been a loyal part of the Sask party from the beginning of his involvement. Nadine Wilson has been in office since 2007, so it'll be interesting to see if she can hold her seat. We think of the PPC example in Quebec, where Bernier still can't get his seat back, and he was a longtime MP. So it really depends on whether people see this as being a hill they want to die on or a statement they want to make. Of course, when you're not in the government party, you don't necessarily get all of the money flowing to your constituency you might otherwise, much as no provincial government would admit it. That may be in the back of their minds. We did see an example in the Maritimes. I think it was in Nova Scotia, where there was a candidate who spoke out against her party, ran as an independent, and won that election. So it'll be interesting to see how strong the convictions are and how loyal the people up there are to her.
It's a tough go for a new party, but I mean it's interesting to see one springing up. It still should, raise some eyebrows at least with the incumbents to make them realize, well, you better watch your flank. I mean, things are small now, but they can grow. Where is Saskatchewan right now in the electoral cycle?
Oh, it's going to be a while yet. I mean, there was an election in fall of 2020, and it was only after that that we saw more lockdowns and more stricter things. I think that it was still always the province that probably had the lightest hand in terms of, I don't want to call it COVID oppression, but in terms of the measures that were put here. So it always did tend more towards the freedom side in a relative sense. But yeah, it's going to be a while. There's enough time for them to certainly get as many candidates. There's no reason they couldn't have a full set of candidates. I don't know. Again, I think in the rural areas, that kind of constituency would be strong enough they could do something. Maybe have, finish third or even second if they did really well. In the last election, the Buffalo Party had hardly begun, and they had 4 candidates that took second place. So that was seen as more than what a lot of political observers thought they were going to have. And we'll just see how much remnant of a vote there is left. But there's a lot that the Sask Party would have to lose before they would lose power. And some of us would like to see more conviction on certain issues, given the amount of slack that they really have. But what you tend to see is that political management always tends towards the safest course of action. And so whatever they can navigate to have the highest share of the vote, they'll just keep doing. And that's why you have parties like this that are built more on conviction.
Oh, we'll watch and see with interest as it unfolds in the coming years. So, yeah, there's a long stretch now then between the next general election. So it's always interesting to watch political play, though. So thanks for coming in to check in and inform us a little more on that today. We don't get nearly enough news out of our neighboring province there, even though we're so close in reality. I mean, geographically and culturally, I think. Except, of course, you guys have got some hockey challenges when it comes to your fandom, apparently. But we'll address that tomorrow when you come on later on with Arthur then.
Great. Talk to you then. Sorry for making the viewers wait till the second week, but we'll be back in action doing a doubleheader and talk again tomorrow.
Right on. Thanks, Lee. Good talking to you.
All right. Thanks, Cory.
All right. So that was Lee Harding, and he writes for us out there in Saskatchewan. A lot of good news copy. He watches those stories out there and some columns and things such as that. You can look him up. Like I said, just search it out on our site and elsewhere with Lee Harding. And yes, we'll be talking some hockey stuff tomorrow too. It doesn't always have to be dry politics and party stuff and everything. We can have a little fun now and then, and we're in for some fun and interesting times coming up in the hockey world. That's for sure. So let's see. Let's get on to some news stories before we get on to the next guest here. We'll be on a little bit. This one's interesting. How do you manage to lose money on an oil pipeline when the whole world is desperate for oil? Well, you let the government run it. So, the Trans Mountain saga, I guess, is the better way to put it. We're just seeing stories coming out now that the government's always confidently said, don't worry, we're going to sell it. We'll make profit. Everything else, it'll be fine. And now they're kind of tuning down their rhetoric on it and saying, well, we'll likely recover the billions spent on the Trans Mountain line. That's what Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland said in committee recently. So cabinet assurances used to be that it was going to have a profit. Now, I guess it was in a Senate tabling. She says, well, it's likely going to allow the government to recoup their expenses. I mean, the bottom line is they won't. When government gets into business, they screw it up every time. That's the nature of government. Government and businesses do not mesh well. We had private dollars who wanted to run that bloody line. I mean, they wanted to do it. It wouldn't have to cost us a cent. But what did we have to do? We had to get the bloody government out of the way. And those ideological fools with the Liberal Party of Canada under Trudeau, you could see that they did bite off more than they could chew. They shut down the Northern Gateway. They regulated energy east to death. That was all intentional. They wanted to see that happen. They still thought, though, well, Trans Mountain's so far along that Kinder Morgan will stay in and they'll finish that up anyways, no matter how bad we beat on them. But no, Kinder Morgan said, you know what? We've had it with you guys. We can't make money in this country. You guys are insane. We're out. And then the government realized they've overplayed their hand way too far. Now we got this partially done pipeline. What the hell are we going to do? And in a panic, they bought it. all they had to do was get out of the way. But no, they bought it. And look at it, creeping along. I don't know if they're using hand shovels on that or what. But we've got thousands of permits that are required. I mean, I know the workers are working on it, and they get on my case every time I talk about how slow that thing's going. And I know they say it's going to get done, it's going to get done. I won't believe it until I see oil going through one end and coming out the other. This is a government capable of doing something as stupid as shutting this thing down before it's constructed. So I know there's camps and there's companies working and there's workers and they're digging and they've buried some line, but I'm having a hard time believing this thing's going to get done. And when we're in this world where they're desperate for oil, they're desperate for gas, and we can't get anything finished. Is it a wonder, that we can't get investment into this country? Of course not. We're a terrible place to do business. Terrible. And so this thing was let's see, got 46% over budget so far. So far. I mean, it was going to be $7.4 billion under Kinder Morgan. That was their estimates on this thing years ago. Now it's up to $21.4 billion is what they're talking about. Just constantly putting up and up and up. How on earth are they managing to piss away that much money on this thing and it's still not in the ground? It's still not being, it's not flowing. Like Gary's saying, a commenter, it's never going to be done. I'm starting to come along line with you, Gary. I'm starting to believe it. They're just going to waste more money and pour more money, and they'll finally say, we can't make it work. Meanwhile, oil's over $100 a barrel. The world is short of oil. We're sitting on one of the biggest deposits on the planet, and we can't expand our capacity to the coast. What a joke. But we'll watch as this goes. They're still creeping along. They're still burying it little by little. Maybe I'll be wrong. I hope to be wrong. I would like to be wrong on this. I want to see that thing finished. I want the federal government to actually be correct for a change and have sold it to a private interest. I don't care if it's a First Nations coalition or a private company, as long as the government bloody well gets out of it. But I'm at a point where I'll only believe it when I see it. And this government, if they got the will to do something, they'll get it done. That's the thing. They had the will to get people out of Ottawa. They were willing to impose the War Measures Act to do it, or at least a form of it. I'll keep calling it that. I know that upsets some people too. Get over it. When you want to suspend the civil liberties of individuals to try and take care of something, look up what the War Measures Act is. Look up what martial law is. When you're willing to do that to get some protesters out of a city, you're a government that's basically willing to get, pull all the stops to get something done. So if they wanted this pipeline done, it would already be flowing, guys. It'd already be out to the coast. They're not in a hurry. This is not a priority for them. But it sure is for us out here. We're getting screwed financially on this thing. And it just keeps going up. We'll see what happens because, again, Ottawa still, Toronto and Montreal and lower mainland BC still love Trudeau. So I don't know if we're ever going to get anything out of this thing. Here's some other beautiful money spent. Again, here's an example of how you can see how a government can take a $7 billion pipeline, turn it up to a $21 billion pipeline, and still not have it done yet. So here was, Dave mentioned it, I think, or no, I'm not sure, but a federal agency paid a pollster. I should look it up whether that was ECOS or not, with crazy Frank Graves. But they paid almost $47,000 for a poll on financial illiteracy. Okay, polls are expensive, $47,000. That's a pretty big poll, but it's conceivable if you're looking for big numbers, you were looking for something really strong. So they must have, for $47,000, must have interviewed thousands and thousands of people on this poll, right? No, 49 people. 49 people got interviewed for $47,000 on this poll on financial literacy. You know who's financially illiterate? Anybody who would vote for the Liberal government when they're screwing us like this. Okay, here it is farther down the story. It wasn't ECOS, it was Leger marketing. But yeah, they were paid, the Financial Consumer Agency paid $46,637 to interview 49 Canadians on financial literacy. Guys, this isn't just incompetence, this is fraud. This is beyond the pale. Come on, we're getting ripped off. They were asked how much time they spend in a month on their household's finances and a bunch of nice fluffy stuff. And they put out this report, with a final report. There should be an investigation following up on this, you guys. And this agency appointed in 2014 a financial literacy leader for $127,000 a year. Yeah, this is the person leading the charge on this. That's actually kind of a lower salary than I would expect out of our overpaid civil service with some of their crap positions and their BS. The Consumers Association of Canada described the work as patronizing. But I mean, it's not a matter of the patronizing work. It's the matter on how on earth do you spend that much money to talk to that few people. What the hell is the matter with you guys? But man, we got another story. This one gets a little different. Here's a human rights. You know, we don't hear about the human rights commissions as much as we used to, but they're still there, and there's still problems. So Imperial Oil, actually, and at least they got some resources, and they're in a big battle right now because what had happened. Now, this is a difficult one, but they'd asked in part of their applications, they wanted to know if a person was eligible to work permanently in Canada. And a fellow looking for a work permit, applying for a job with Imperial, said yes, he was. But it turns out he wasn't. And when they found out that he wasn't, they withdrew a job offer. So he got taken to the Human Rights Tribunal Ontario, and they upheld the claim against them from the applicant and awarded him $120,000. Now, it's not beyond reason. I mean, if you're looking for a permanent long-term job, to ask if the person's qualified to actually sit in the job for the longer term. Where are we at? At what point with employers are we going to get where questions are considered too intrusive? I mean, you got to watch it when you're hiring people. So, I mean, if somebody's only here on a 2-year visa, that is of concern. And it's not like they had a problem with this gentleman being an immigrant. They just wanted to make sure he was a permanent one, not temporary. And apparently, you're not allowed to ask. Well, where does that leave you as an employer? If you have, and you know, the backfiring thing, the thing that's bad about this and that's wrong, if you're not allowed to ask about these things, you can see prejudice. You can see people turned away from jobs that normally would have qualified, because an employment person who's afraid to ask, they're not allowed to ask, actually, as per that ruling, whether or not this person is able to work permanently or is going to be here in the long run, will just actually go through the interview and not hire the person just to be on the safe side. And they could miss out on a fantastic applicant. Another person could lose their job because they do appear to be an immigrant, but they're not sure if it's permanent, so they just won't hire them. That's what these ridiculous kinds of rulings do. They backfire and they make it worse for the employer and for the prospective employees and for the immigrants. So, I mean, at what point, you know, it's a private business. You've got to be able to ask these questions. You got to know if they're going to be with you or not. That's not an unreasonable thing. It's not a prejudice thing to ask. You know, you just got to know. But as it stands, you will get charged. So, let's see. Oh, sorry. I was just looking at a different comment there. We're going to get on to our next guest with Spencer Fernando pretty quickly here. So I'm looking forward to that. I should speak to our sponsor quickly, though, our next sponsor, and that is the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. These guys are a great organization. I've talked about them many a times. They've been a great sponsor for us, but they're also with what they do. If you own firearms, you like, you enjoy firearms, even if you're considering firearms, they're an association of firearm owners. They've got the resources there to help you safely utilize your firearms. All sorts of videos on things, whether shooting sports, as their name implies, whether target shooting, skeet shooting, black powder, all sorts of things. Most of all, they are lobbying on your behalf. We got a government that, of course, is constantly trying to take away your right and ability to use and enjoy firearms. And you need to stand up for yourself. And of course, how do you do it as an individual? You can't. You have to have an association. You have to get together. You have to do it. That's what these guys are about. And they need your help, though. You know, the government's going to take, as we've seen, they brought in a backdoor registry. The only reason they're registering your firearms is because they plan to take them. It's the only reason they want to know where they all are. That's just step one. Find out where they are. Step two, steal them. So the Canadian Shooting Sports Association is out there. They're watching these news items. They're standing up for you. They've put out court challenges. I'm sure they got more to come. But you got to take out a membership with them so they can help you. So check them out. Google them, Canadian Shooting Sports Association, or you can, their website is cssa-cila.org. Again, take out a membership with them. That's the way they can help you, because if you don't stand up for yourself, you will lose those rights. The government is always eager to take them away. All right, well, let's get ready for Spencer Fernando. It's been a while since I've had Spencer on. As I said, he's a very prolific columnist. He's got stuff out there all over the place. Particularly the one that recently caught my eye was the one with the National Citizens Coalition, which he's involved with. And that is, where am I here? Well, I see Spencer there. I'm just trying to find the story. But hey, Spencer, how's it going?
Not bad. Yourself?
Good to see you. There we go. The authoritarian arrogance of the liberal elites. I mean, how could I not be drawn to a title like that? And you only expanded further from there. Can you kind of start off in a nutshell what that column was about, Spencer?
Yeah, the idea was, we're seeing how angry, I guess you could call it the establishment media and many people in the government get when, Pierre Poilievre says, oh, he's going to, fire the Bank of Canada governor. Anyone who even criticizes the Bank of Canada, even before he said that, people were losing their minds over that. And, it's kind of the attitude of, here's a group of people who have a lot of power. The Bank of Canada has tremendous power to influence, our economy, our way of life. They can devalue our currency, which means they can make the money you earn worth less. And so that's a massive impact. That's tremendous power, far more than really anyone else in this country has. And so the idea that somehow they should be, protected from criticism or protected from accountability is really antithetical to democracy. And I think that's what I mean by the authoritarian attitude, where it's, in authoritarian countries like China, no one would dare question the government because, the government is above you. The government's better than you. The people in the Communist Party, they're the elites, and they control, how your life is going to be, and you should know your place and you shouldn't question them. Now, we're not supposed to be an authoritarian country. We're supposed to be a place where people are allowed to question authority, where we encourage people to question authority, because we're supposed to believe that authority is accountable to the people and can be influenced and controlled by the people. And so it's very concerning to see a lot of people in the media and in the political establishment who seem to somehow think that certain institutions should be just free from from being accountable and free from criticism.
Well, yeah, and that was something that was really quite something to see them line up. And again, I'll get because you had another column on your own site, Spencer Fernando, about the media, because I mean, that's part of the establishment as well. And they were horrified that somebody dared criticize the head of the Bank of Canada. I mean, you could disagree with whether or not the critique was accurate or founded, but it was the ability to even criticize that they were so mortified about. And that's distressing. I mean, no position in this country is above critique, or should be.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think it's that way, but it seems that a lot of people in the establishment don't believe that, and that's quite concerning to see. And I think it's interesting. You're seeing it's not just the liberals and the media, but within the conservative leadership race itself. Jean Charest, Patrick Brown, they've echoed a lot of those criticisms of Pierre Poilievre. So I think that's an attitude that some within the Conservative Party have as well, which should be quite concerning to people. We're not going to be a free and democratic country for long. For some people, obviously, we're not a free country. But, we're not going to maintain any freedom or democracy for long if we kind of accept that kind of attitude, that here's the people who are in a higher class than you. They run the country. They get to control how things are, and you don't get to criticize them. That's the opposite of what Canada's supposed to be.
Yeah, well, there shouldn't be any sacred cows. I mean, the people appointed to some of these very high positions within the country, and they're appointed. That's one of the areas where we have difficulties with the democratic ability. We should at least then be able to openly critique them or support them. But I mean, when you say it's beyond that, then we start to get worried, and how are we supposed to hold them to account if we can't even mention them?
Yeah, there's obviously a double standard. I mean, Justin Trudeau has been undermining confidence in institutions for quite some time, obviously, with the SNC-Lavalin controversy. He's had no problem interfering with the justice system. We saw what he did to Jody Wilson-Raybould. So, much of the media was fine to give him mostly a free pass for that, but all of a sudden Pierre Poilievre talks about the Bank of Canada and people go crazy. I think part of it might be that much of the media doesn't really understand how the monetary system works. They don't understand how inflation and money printing are linked. So to them, it's just all incomprehensible. And they hear Poilievre talking about it saying, well, I don't understand this, so I guess it must be something dangerous and terrible. So they kind of go crazy in that way. So, I think we need to always maintain the spirit of questioning institutions, criticizing those in power, and not putting people on a pedestal just because they have a temporary position in government.
Yeah, so I'll kind of pivot to your own piece, on your own site there that you've written, and that's where the media holds the opposition accountable, and politicians are blaming the public for anger and division. One of the roles, even if you didn't have an effective necessarily of elected opposition, or if there's problems, the the media used to always be there to at least, dig in on stories, look into things. But they do seem to spend more time going after the front runners in the Conservative Party race than they looking at the government or the agreement between them and Jagmeet Singh right now.
Yeah, and I think much of that was really inevitable when it got to the point where the government subsidizes much of the media. I mean, you're gonna be influenced by whoever pays your bills. There's no real way around that. So if the government's paying your bills as a media institution, well, you're probably going to, want to keep that government in power. And it's not just government versus, critics of the government. It's the fact that the Conservative Party is much less likely in government to give that kind of money to the media. The media knows that, so they have a financial interest in keeping the Conservatives out of power and keeping the Liberal, NDP coalition or pact, whatever you want to call it, in power. And then, of course, the way, there was the response to, people yelling at Jagmeet Singh. I don't think that was appropriate behavior. I don't think, acting towards someone like that is acceptable. I'm not a fan of Jagmeet Singh, but it's still important to remember you're talking about a human being, a husband and a father. So, trying to say some of the things people said about it, screaming at somebody, you're not going to influence anybody by screaming at them. But the way the media coverages is they act as if none of that has any, underlying cause or reason, right? Politicians are allowed to say anything they want about unvaccinated people, about people in the Freedom Convoy. They can demonize people, call them Nazis and racists and bigots. But then when people get angry at politicians, it's, that we have to draw the line there. That's unacceptable. So I think we need to have a more holistic view of things and realize people don't just get angry at politicians for no reason. Someone doesn't just wake up and say, I'm angry at politicians today, just randomly, right? If people are struggling financially, that's a big reason. If people have been demonized by politicians and the government, that's a big reason. So I think it's disingenuous to just act as if it's just the only issue is the anger of politicians without asking where a lot of that anger comes from and the responsibility politicians have in generating the conditions that led to that anger.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of, if you want to look for the source of division, you should be looking at the top rather than the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
we've got it backwards. Another piece I see, you called out our public safety minister, which was great because as you pointed out, these are things that media needs to be looking at. You've got to record this. Your average citizen doesn't necessarily watch all these committee meetings or these things that they're saying. But this fellow, as you said, he keeps spreading misinformation and purposely and blatantly and repeatedly, but he's not getting held accountable for this. Where do you stop these guys from spreading BS like this?
Yeah, I think it's a good reason, why people are so concerned about the government trying to control social media and the internet, because they're not going to use that to objectively, censor disinformation. They're just going to use it to censor their critics, because Marco Mendicino, he goes to the committee and says, we had Freedom Convoy supporters and members who were, setting fire to buildings. Well, no, the police have said twice now that those incidents had nothing to do with Freedom Convoy supporters. Even some of the media the government likes, CBC even had to report and kind of edit one of their reports and say, we were wrong, and it had nothing to do with the Freedom Convoy whatsoever. And then Marco Mendicino, obviously knowing that, he knows that it's been debunked, you could say. He goes there and says it anyway, I guess because he thought it would get him a good soundbite or because he thought it would be politically beneficial. And that's spreading disinformation. That's misinformation, So where's his ban? Where's his censorship? Of course, it's not going to be used against him because he's in the government, not a critic of the government. So I think it also shows why independent media is so important, why what we're doing is so important, because much of the media, they don't want to call the government to liars. They don't want to point out that Mendicino is spreading disinformation. And so they'll just give it a pass. They'll either not cover it or kind of, give it a nice spin. So we need people doing what we're doing, which is actually exposing the truth. Yeah,
well, and that's it. If any conservative politician had misrepresented the tragedy of the Mark Lepine slaughter of women, for political points, that conservative politician rightly would be just, pilloried by the media and other politicians. Yet the public safety minister used that completely off base and wrong. And again, aside from, Andrew Lawton and yourself and some other alternative media, he got away with it.
Yeah, and again, that's the double standard that I think a lot of people are upset about. And, to go back to the conservative leadership race, you're seeing in response to, the horrific event that happened in the United States in Buffalo, you're seeing people trying to score political points against Pierre Poilievre now. People tweeting things out about, Pat King expressed a similar view as the gunman in the United States. And Pat King had a link to the Freedom Convoy. And didn't Pierre Poilievre say he supported the Freedom Convoy? Ergo, Pierre Poilievre is the same as the Buffalo shooter or some insanity like that, right? Maybe not going that far, but that's the link they're trying to make in people's minds, right? They're trying to take a very tragic and terrible event in the United States and attack the front runner of the conservative leadership race. So I think we all really need to be aware of the damage that does. And of course, they're going to keep calling Poilievre the divisive candidate, even though he's not the one accusing his opponents of being linked to mass murderers. So, I think that double standard, it never gets applied to, say, someone who does something and may have more of a liberal ideology, right? It never gets linked to, the rhetoric of Justin Trudeau or anybody. It's only one side. It's only conservatives who get linked to these things when something happens. So I think that's another reason a lot of people have lost trust in the establishment media, because the narrative is so obvious. Some terrible event happens, there's a shooting somewhere. How can we use this terrible event to attack conservatives? And it just gets done over and over and over again. And it divides us even more. And it's the opposite of what people who claim to be in support of unity should be doing.
Yeah, so I'm going to pivot a little bit, just a little farther back to one of the things you wrote on as well. And speaking of divisive, at least in a regional sense, was the Alberta challenge against Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill. It was successful. It got quashed. But then the challenge in Alberta against the carbon tax was successful too. Now it's going to go to the federal Supreme Court. And I mean, it's a very hot item out here in Alberta. Do you think that there's going to be any success on the federal front, though, when that challenge goes forward to there against the No More Pipelines bill?
Yeah, I mean, past history would show there's not too much of a chance. What was interesting about the ruling was it did talk about the division of powers between different levels of government, provincial and federal. So that's something where it may not be much of an ideological issue, because people say the Supreme Court's not motivated by ideology. Everybody is. Everybody has an ideology and it influences them. So no institution is fully free from that. But if it becomes more of a procedural or division of powers argument, then there is possibly a chance. But even if that happened, I expect the Liberals will just reintroduce a slightly tweaked version of the legislation and impose it again, because they're acting in a very ideological way. I mean, we saw when many countries in Europe were saying, hey, we would prefer not to be getting our oil and gas from Russia. Maybe Canada could be a country that could help us out. And Trudeau basically straight up said, yeah, we'll do a little bit, but we're not going to, alter our climate goals to, produce more oil and gas. So it's a very deep ideology that he and his government have. And the only way I think to change that is to get them out of office, because, whatever ruling, even if it goes against them, they'll just introduce similar legislation again. Yeah,
and I mean, the courts are, slow enough that if you took that to court again, they could have years of imposed legislation. But boy, we're a long ways, it seems, from replacing them. I mean, the Conservatives seem to be gaining a little bit of ground, I guess, in a sense right now. But I think some people seem to prefer the Conservatives without a leader than as opposed to the past leader they had. But a lot will depend on who wins, I guess, and how things go in the next year. So with a minority government, we just never know when we're going to go into an election now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it has been interesting though, because the media keeps saying, oh, the Conservatives committed political suicide by having prominent members support the Freedom Convoy. Oh, they're really in trouble now. Talking about inflation in the Bank of Canada. Oh, they're in big trouble, and they continue to lead in the polls. Amid that situation, and so it shows again a lot of the media disconnect from the general public, and I think the underlying anger and discontent in the country. I mean, inflation everywhere in the world produces a lot of anger. You look at countries where it's really gotten out of control. Sri Lanka, for example, having food shortages. It's descending into chaos in large parts of that country. So I don't think we'll get to the same point here in Canada, obviously, but inflation makes people angry and it discredits the people in power. Justin Trudeau, it's easy to forget, but he came to power largely on the idea that he was going to make life more affordable. He did the escalator ad, in the 2015 campaign, where he's walking up an escalator going down saying, oh, a lot of Canadians feel like it's tough to get ahead. And that was an effective campaign for him. You don't hear him talking too much about affordability now, because that wouldn't really bode well for him. And so I think that's one reason Poilievre is talking about the Bank of Canada and talking about inflation and money, the monetary system, money printing. He's linking that together in people's minds. And so if the election does come down to affordability, then that's not good for the Liberals. And strangely enough, the NDP. The NDP used to be very much the party of working class people, making life more affordable. Jagmeet Singh's really jumped onto the Trudeau bandwagon. He's linked himself to Trudeau, and Trudeau's the one in power during massive inflation. So that's not going to help the NDP either. So I think that's going to be the issue. Whether things are a lot different in 3 years' time, that remains to be seen. But of course, future inflation, even if it goes down, is still based on already inflated prices. So it's not like it's going back to where it was and people are going to find life super affordable all of a sudden. And so I think, if it's Poilievre who leads the Conservative Party, he's been out there, for quite some time, sharing a message that's very opposite from what the Liberals and NDP are pushing. So if people are looking to really move in a different direction, then I think that benefits Poilievre and the Conservative Party.
That's it. I mean, ideals only sell so well when people can't pay their bills. The reality when your mortgage starts coming first, or putting food on the shelves and things like that. So the Liberals are going to have to respond to that pretty soon. So I mean, or not. I mean, at least we see some light at the end of the governing tunnel, anyways. Thank you very much for checking in with us today. Maybe where can we find more information on where you're writing and what you're doing, Spencer?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Spencer Fernando. My website, spencerfernando.com, and I do a lot of writing at nationalcitizens.ca as well. So those are the 3 places to look.
Great. Yeah, and if you search Spencer Fernando, I know you put columns out in a number of other areas around as well, and even occasionally here. So lots of good stuff that you're always writing. I always appreciate it when we get a chance to talk to you and seeing what you're putting out there, Spencer. So I'll let you get back to it. And thanks for joining us today.
Alrighty, have a good day.
So as I said, yes, that was Spencer Fernando. He's with the National Citizens Coalition, and he has his own site there, spencerfernando.com, and he's a very prolific columnist and commentator throughout there. And so he's worth a follow and certainly worth reading his stuff. And it's always a good conversation, as I said, when we get him on. I'll go through some more new stuff, but let's talk one more time about our sponsor, and that is Bitcoin Well. Tongue twister there today. It's because I was up so late watching that hockey game last night. Bitcoin Well, again, that reminder, just to expand a little more what these guys are about. They're there to help educate you, because, I mean, these digital currencies, they're new. They can be confusing. I know for me, I have difficulty wrapping my head around how that Bitcoin mining works and things like that. Their whole thing is helping teach you. As you can see with Bitcoin Academy, they've partnered with Athabasca University. They have online training sessions to show you what it's about. Bitcoin for beginners. Don't be afraid to be a beginner. We always are with something. News, things like that. They'll show you how it can be practical, not something that's just a theory or something foreign to you. They'll set you up with how you can pay your utility bills, how you can set up savings plans for yourselves, what you could do. Bitcoinwell.com. If you're looking to get into digital currencies, guys, these are the guys to look into, and that is the path to do it. So you can safely decide if it works for you or if it doesn't. Yeah, I know, Shelley, I saw some commenters, people saying Bitcoin went down. Well, yes, it did. But, housing prices crashed once too. It doesn't mean you get out of owning houses. Things like any market, any commodity have their ups and downs. Now, again, I'm not going to give investment advice. It's beyond me. But if you're looking to get in digital currencies, that's why I talk about them as a sponsor. Do it the right way. They're more the exchange. They're the ones who are going to help you get into it and set your wallet up and do things like that. As to whether it's a good decision for your own finances or not, of course, that's up to you. And perhaps speaking with the representative from Bitcoin Well. You can't look at a snapshot of any investment and try to look at the long term on whether it was a good one or a bad one. I mean, if you'd gotten into Bitcoin 15 years ago when it first came out, even if it's down to 10% of what it was, you make out like a bandit. As Cheryl's saying, better to buy low than high. I mean, it's the guess, of course, of when to get in and low. When is it low? Is it going to go lower? Is it going to go higher? You got to look at the longer plan. And again, it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody, but it's certainly for a lot of people. And if you're looking to get involved and dip your toe into the digital currency market, though, that's the route to go for Bitcoin, anyways. And they're a good company. At least you got it. The Bitcoin itself. I won't speak to that, but at least for a good, solid company to help get you set up with it and involved with it. I mean, because that's half the battle too. Bitcoinwell.com. Those are the guys to help you there. So here's something we got going on into second reading. MPs giving second reading to a Senate bill to criminalize organ trafficking. This is interesting. So they've been trying to banish this for years. Forced organ harvesting that's happening in the third world. This is some bizarre stuff, and it's nasty. I can't imagine how bad things have got to get in some third world places and such. But I mean, if somebody's being forced to, murdered or at least to have part of their organs taken away, it's pretty horrible. It's apparently kidneys sell on the black market for as much as $170,000. And you can see there's been some degree of medical tourism, people flying to get kidney transplants and things like that. They don't know how many people have been doing it. It's awful to think. Now, what gets me, though, with these things is, okay, fine. You know, we never want to see somebody forced and have their organs stolen or coerced into, quote unquote, donating it, especially something like a kidney where, presumably you can donate one and still survive with the other. But it brings about that broader issue that bugs me. It gets me rolling. And I put that out on Twitter because there's one of those other areas with the progressives where they seem to have a bit of a lapse. And that's that my body, my choice thing. In Canada, it's pretty much illegal to do anything medical. Anything. It's illegal. We can't pay people to give blood. Can't pay sperm donors. Can't pay plasma donors. And we can't pay organ donors. Well, is it my body or not? Is it my blood or not? Is it my, sperm? I had a vasectomy, so it's not much good for anything anymore, I guess. But all the same, if somebody wanted to buy it, is it not my right to produce it and sell it? Well, not in Canada. And what does it lead to is shortcomings. So what we've got right now, it's so stupid in Canada, where it's illegal to pay somebody to give plasma, which is a bigger donation. It takes more time, it's a bigger commitment, and they really need it. I mean, plasma is very helpful in a bunch of medical procedures. So what do? We buy it from the United States. Yeah, if you look it up, the bulk of the plasma we get in Canada comes from the United States. Why does the United States have a surplus of plasma? Well, because they pay the people to give it down there. Like, this is how mind-bendingly stupid the health zealots are, where we just can't get over that principle of paying somebody or something in the health business. Get over it. Start paying people to give the plasma. We'll stop running out because you're still buying it anyway. You're not saving a thing. In fact, you have to ship it up. So we could put more money in Canadians' pockets, get more people giving that plasma that we need, plus regular blood, plus sperm, plus eggs, plus all those other things we can donate. And yeah, I even include kidneys, as long as you can always make sure somebody's not being coerced. You know what? If I wanted to sell one of my eyeballs or my left testicle, it should be my business to do it, as long as I got a buyer. So as it is, we got this going on, this horrible concept of some people who might be well-heeled or desperate flying across the world to get an organ transplant somewhere else where there might not be good, solid human rights, and organs have been harvested without somebody's consent. We've got to, there's so many aspects of why our health system is broken and behind the times and ineffective. And one of which is that big one with this hang-up over paying people to give blood, plasma, organs, any of those things. It's tragic how many organs are we burying or cremating that we didn't need to, that lives could have been saved. I mean, that's another thing when it just comes to people donating. God, sign your donor card, guys. I mean, hey, it's the easiest charitable donation you can. If you happen to pass on, if somebody can make use of anything I've still got left on this carcass, have at it. I really hope that it can help there. But if it's living donations as well, things like that, blood, plasma, let people get paid for it. We're paying anyhow because we're running short of blood all the time, running short of plasma, running short of organs. Let's cut it out. Set aside the squeamishness, get over it, let somebody pay to do it, and we solve a big problem because we're paying anyway. That's the part that gets me. You're not winning a point of principle. You're just paying Americans now to send their plasma all the way up to here. What a ridiculous, ridiculous system. Something Dave mentioned, and here's another one. Looking to speak to somebody. I'm trying to talk to a guest about that later, but with the association, I think, for the wrongly convicted. But David Milgaard passed away, 69 years old. If anybody deserved to live to 100, it was David Milgaard, considering that the justice system robbed him of 23 years of his life, was it? Because he was wrongly convicted of a murder back in Saskatchewan. And either way, he'd been in Calgary with his son and daughter, and he's now passed away, which is sad. And of course, the other sad part was he had 23 years of his life stolen, and it's just awful. And it's that reminder, I used to be the hardcore conservative. I used to support capital punishment. He's the case that reminded me, no, I cannot and I will not support capital punishment. How could I sit every day and show and talk all the time about how incompetent government is, how incompetent judges are, how incompetent sometimes police actions are, and then say, oh, but I want to trust them with the power to execute somebody. I can't do it. My mind doesn't work that way. I cannot trust them with that. People say, oh, only in cases when it's 100%. Look, they always say it's 100%. They say only with cases with DNA. Guys, there's cases in the States where DNA data had been meddled with. Nothing is 100%, except execution, because once you do that, you never get them back. Now, thankfully, Milgaard, at least as far as that went, his conviction came after capital punishment had just gone away, but it still led to him doing 23 years in prison. They were 100% sure that he was guilty of murdering a young nurse. All he was a young man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if we'd have had a strong capital punishment system at that time, he would have been executed. At least, even though he was locked up for 23 years, an innocent man, I can't imagine how that must feel. Every night you go to bed in prison knowing you didn't do something and you're stuck there for decades. His mother never gave up. She was a fantastic woman, kept pushing. He was finally, exonerated after much of reviews with the Supreme Court and some DNA evidence. But either way, the poor guy has passed away. I hope during that, he had 25 years free since being released. I hope he made the most of it and it was as good as possible. It's just sad to see his passing. And we've always got to remember, I don't ever want to see the courts doing anything irreversible. I don't have pity. I know there's a lot of scumbags, pedophiles, murderers out there, and when they're really actually guilty, I'm not going to weep when they die. But I just don't trust the state to get it right with something as irreversible as an execution. Life sentences, real life sentences, absolutely. Weld that door shut. Get them in there, say you're going to die of old age in this prison. And at least, even if there's some slim chance when you thought it was 100%, new evidence comes along 10, 20, 30 years later. Holy crap, well, at least we can let them out for a little bit. But if you put them in the ground, it's over. And I just, if you don't trust the government with everything else, I don't know how so many people, and we hear that from a lot of conservatives all the time. I don't trust the government for this. I don't trust them for that. I don't trust them for this. Oh, but I want them to have the power to execute people. No, don't. It's the last power they should ever have. So rest in peace, Mr. Milgaard. As I said, I hope you had as good a life as you could, at least with that time after you were free. Very possibly he did. I mean, I would think of any person who would appreciate your time in life would be somebody who's already had so much of it stolen from him earlier. Awful cases. And Kenny's saying, what about Bernardo Olson should have had the death penalty? No. I mean, did I weep when Olson died? Not a bit. He was a sick bugger. Same with Bernardo. He's there. I don't care about him. But you lock them up for life because there's still a slim chance that one of them might have been innocent. And I would rather just lock them up for life than take that risk that you execute. I'd rather have 100 Bernardos in prison and not execute one innocent person for murder. You can't take that chance. It's too big a risk. And we've seen that the system can screw up badly. And we've seen the DNA is not 100% foolproof either. Nothing is 100% foolproof. And as I said, the only thing that is 100% is death. So if we allow the state to take somebody's life, you can't turn that clock back. And I don't trust the state. I don't. So how can you say all the time, all the protesters, all the anti-mandate people, all the other ones, get out of my face. I don't trust the government. I hate the government. There's conspiracies. The government should be in my face. Oh, but they should execute people? No, you can't have both, guys. You're trusting them with the most strong power on the planet, the ability to kill people. Yet you don't trust them with other stuff. Don't let them have that. And either way, so Dennis saying that it should have been executed immediately, 15 minutes on death row, not 15 years. No, I mean, just no death row, none. The government can't get it right, especially 15 minutes later executing. Just don't. Life sentences, guys. Either way, let's see. A new study offering a closer look at some of the factors that lead to, this one's great. This was out of CTV. So people, I get sidetracked by comments. Panel is saying, so taxpayers have to support these criminals in jail. Yes, that's how it works. And if you look to the United States, it costs more in the long process of executing and everything anyways. And again, Pamela, you don't know if they're guilty. You don't. I would rather pay for them and have them in and have them die of old age in there than execute an innocent person. And the government screws everything up. So somebody will get executed. So no, I know I've seen your comments, Pamela. You don't trust the government. You say that all the time, but you want them to kill people. You can't have it both ways. You trust them or not. I don't trust them. I don't want them killing people. Getting back, anyways, this study. Talking about, though, this is beautiful. This is out of CTV. So they've discovered that up to 9% of people who are hospitalized for COVID have been readmitted within 30 days. Oh, wait, Pamela. Okay, one more time with you. You know Bernardo and Olson were guilty. No, you don't. You don't. Unless you were there, you don't know it. I'm glad you don't have the power to execute people. All right, I'm going to stop looking at comments. So 9% of people who went into the hospital for COVID ended up back in within a month. And so they're talking again. This is where they talk about the long COVID. They start saying we got to be scared and that we've got to, they're trying to push the fear. CTV, any positive developments, they want to keep us afraid. They constantly push it. So this is the big study. 9% of the ones who got into the hospital for COVID in the first place found themselves back in within a month. What they don't mention is almost everybody who got into the hospital with COVID had comorbidities. They already had problems. They were often very obese. They had other issues. They were very, very old. I mean, if you have an 85-year-old who was in hospital for a while with COVID, yeah, there's a good chance that 85-year-old is going to be in the hospital again soon. That's called being 85. Somebody morbidly obese, somebody with a heart condition, somebody who's fighting with cancer, because that's the people who the COVID was strongly affecting. So this is not a groundbreaking study. This is just meaning people who are unhealthy and sick are still unhealthy and sick after having COVID. But that's the headlines in CTV. Everybody be afraid. Everybody be scared. We've got to constantly worry and talk long COVID because the immediate COVID is going behind. So just the mainstream just doesn't want to let it go. CTV is the worst of them. They're worse even than CBC. The only advantage is CTV doesn't get as directly as massively subsidized as CBC, but I can't stand watching their coverage yet. I torture myself doing it because I got to keep up with stuff. So I watch it at night when I'm eating supper, but it'll always be, if they write about anything, hospitalizations are down, they will always make sure to talk about one thing that's scary, one thing that's bad, one thing that's worse. They never want to have positive news. They won't let it out there. And here's another beauty. It was in the papers. 3 months now it's been since that attack, the BC work camp. Apparently, and it's on the CGL pipeline. And there's apparently 40 RCMP investigators on this. And this organized attack, between 20 and 40 people, they think, carrying torches, flare guns, and axes. And they don't even have a lead? This is one of the best conspiracies in the world, guys. How is such an organized eco-terrorist act like this not even got a lead? In an isolated area, they organized, they got up there, they did several $1 million in damage, and they got away spotlessly clean. There's some incompetence going on somewhere, guys, and this is scary stuff. Again, this is part of why we can't get anything done. How do you do business in this country? How would you invest in any large project when we can't even catch our own eco-terrorists? Why would you want to invest your money, start something big like that, and then have eco-terrorists hold it up? I don't know what's going on up there. We're months later, and they haven't even got a bloody lead. Scary stuff. Okay, well, that's enough rambling and ranting for today. Hey, I got a good show tomorrow. Like I was saying, I've got Arthur Green. He's one of the writers for us. He's going to talk about his support for the Flames. He's cheering for them in the Battle of Alberta that's coming up. And at the same time, we're going to have Lee Harding back, who was on earlier, and he's going to speak. He's an Oilers fan. Yeah, I know. But I've seen some of the both in the audience there, and they're going to duke it out a little bit with a bit of a on-the-air Battle of Alberta. I've also got, and again, it's hard with these leader candidates, but Scott Aitchison, one of the leadership candidates for the Conservative Party of Canada. He came in, we had him in studio, I interviewed him, we'll play the recording of it. It was a good conversation. He does stand out. He's at least one of the ones against supply management. And he came across as quite reasonable and controlled in the debates. He's carving his ground. He seems to be a good, rational person. So it'll be a good interview to talk to. So thank you all you guys for tuning in today. I do appreciate it. And hey, if you missed it earlier too, Danielle was on, Danielle Smith at 9 o'clock this morning. It's up there on Rumble for you to see. And all of our past stuff's up there. So check it out. The audio recordings are up on Podbean. And Danielle will be back Wednesday morning. I'll be back at 11:30 tomorrow. So I'll see you then.